Dustfall thought I tied the red scarf to remember my mother, but I had just discovered what was hidden inside it, a patch of dried, burnt-smelling blood sewn back by my father. I didn't remember my mother's face. I didn't remember her voice. But last night, I remembered something else. The smell of burning hair, the sound of my father screaming my name, and my small hand holding a red stick. If those fragments of memory were true, then my mother's death wasn't caused by a fever like my father said. What had I done that my father had to hide behind a bloody scarf? I'm Rowan, 20 years in Dustfall, enough to get used to people looking at me and then looking at the red scarf tied behind my back and whispering, "Poor thing, tying a scarf to remember my mother. This girl has lived alone with her old father since she was little." I heard everything, but I didn't object. Only, I couldn't remember my mother's face. I couldn't remember how she smiled, how she walked. In my head, there were only a few small sounds. The sound of something falling on the wooden floor, the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. That was all. That day, I rode Blaze around town. It was dry and windy. Nothing special, until a strong gust of wind blew the scarf off my back. It fell to the ground. I got off my horse, picked it up, and tried to tie it again. But I saw a new tear, right at the edge of the fabric. A few old threads had come loose, exposing the fabric underneath. I put my fingers in. I felt something hard. I gently pried it. It fell apart into small pieces. Dried blood. And the smell, the burning smell, very clear, even after many years. I squatted beside the horse, holding the handkerchief closer to my face. The inside was all clumsy stitching. It wasn't my mother's, my father's. I recognized the stitching. The story of "mother died of fever" suddenly became absurd. Mother had a fever and the handkerchief was stained with blood? Fever and the handkerchief smelled of burning? I stood up and patted Blaze to calm myself. My heart was pounding as if I had just run. On the way home, I left the handkerchief in the saddle instead of tying it behind me. For the first time in my life, I didn't want it touching me. That night, I sat in my room, the door closed, and lit a small oil lamp. I put the handkerchief on the table, looking at it like evidence. A few fragmented images, like childhood memories, began to flash through my mind. The yellow firelight, the smell of burning hair, my father's loud "Rowan" scream. Why did he have to sew it up? Why did he have to hide the smell of burning? And why was this the only scarf left after Mother's death? Mother died of illness, but Little Red Riding Hood didn't say that. Little Red Riding Hood was telling a completely different story. And that night, I had the feeling that I had accidentally pulled the first thread of a secret that had been hidden for a long time. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of the cows or the fence repair, just because of that red handkerchief that kept me awake. Father was sitting at the kitchen table when I came down. He was drinking black coffee, as he always did in the morning. I sat across from him, but said nothing about the night before. I just watched him, my hands shaking slightly, my eyes darting away every time I caught sight of the handkerchief sticking out of my pocket. "I went to the cemetery today." He looked up immediately. It was a bit of an overreaction. "What are you doing up there?" "To visit Mom." His coffee cup tilted slightly, spilling a few drops onto the table. "I have a lot of work in the stables. Go by yourself." I didn't ask any more questions, but I noticed Father avoided the subject by reflex, as if the mere mention of his mother made him want to leave the room. At the cemetery, Dustfall Cemetery was on a rocky hill, overgrown with grass. The afternoon wind was strong. The tombstones were tilted. I picked up Blaze, tied him to a stake, and headed straight for my mother. I knew the location because I had been there several times as a child. But the older I got, the more I avoided it. As I got closer, I saw something unusual. The tombstone was split in half. Not a natural split. It was two completely different pieces of stone joined together. Moss-covered, worn edges, light-colored, square-cornered, smooth surface. Between the two halves was a line of gray cement, clearly not long applied. I touched the old part, cold, rough. touched the new part, completely different. It felt like the stone had never been through a rainy season. Who replaced half the tombstone? And why only half? No one does that unless they need to hide or erase something. Eleanor Ward, the good mother. The word ward is right where the stone was cut. That is, someone had to recarve it when they replaced the stone. My mother died of a fever, according to my father, and the grave was patched? It didn't make sense. I go to City Hall to find a death certificate. I went straight down to the City Hall. The records room was small, smelled of damp paper. The old clerk was smoking a pipe. I need to see Eleanor Ward's death certificate. He flipped through the books, searched for a long time. There isn't one. Look again, I said, as calmly as I could. He opened 2 more books, the sick book, the burial book. Also shook his head. Nobody named Eleanor Ward died in Dustfall. No death certificate, no medical records, no burial records. I stood still for a few seconds, not because of shock, but because I felt the string of doubt in my head begin to tighten. So what about a grave in the cemetery? If the family buried it privately, without notifying the town, there would be nothing on the records. That's not uncommon in Dustfall. But my father never mentioned the need for a secret burial, or that my mother died in such strange circumstances that no paperwork could be done. The mother died of a fever story had too big a hole. Confronting father, too many things did not match. When I got home, my father was chopping wood behind the barn. I didn't beat around the bush. Did you replace half of Mom's headstone? Dad stopped hammering. His face changed color. Why are you digging into that? Why isn't there a death certificate? Why doesn't anyone know Mom died? He turned to leave, as if to end the conversation. But I stood in his way. Look at me and answer, I said. At that moment, for the first time, I saw Dad really scared. Not scared of me, but scared of what I was about to find out. Rowan, there are things that should be left alone. But left alone never explained the dried blood in the towel, the half-new headstone, or the way Dad avoided everything related to Mom. That night, I went to bed feeling like I was standing in front of a deep well, and my dad was the one standing on the well cap, holding it tight for all those years. The next day, I decided to find the last living person who had seen my mother, the only person who wasn't part of my family, not part of my father's story. Hunt her back. I left the farmhouse that afternoon, heading straight for the tavern on the edge of Dustfall. There were often people there who didn't want to talk to the town, but who told the truth when they needed to. The coyote's den was old, its tin roof leaking. I pushed open the door and walked in, the smell of alcohol and smoke so strong it was hard to breathe. A few people looked at me, at the red handkerchief sticking out of my pockets, then turned away. I saw Beck sitting in the far corner. He was still thin, his beard white, his eyes gray as if he had never slept. I pulled up a chair opposite, not beating around the bush. You were the last person to see my mother alive. I need to hear everything. Beck looked at me for a long time, expressionless. Finally, he tapped his finger on his glass. I knew you would ask someday. I took out the red handkerchief and set it on the table. My mother's scarf. It was covered with dried blood. My father sewed it up. You know what happened, right? Beck sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'll tell you. House fire, the first detail that did not match Father's words. It was a windy day, Beck began. I was following a deer trail past your farm. I smelled something burning, and at first I thought the stove was on fire. He paused. But when I turned back into the wind, I saw smoke coming from the roof. By the time I got closer, the fire had spread to the entire kitchen. My heart sank. Father had never said anything about fire. Where's my mother? I asked. She was lying on the porch. One side of her shirt was stuck to a half-burned wooden post. The red scarf was wrapped crookedly. One end was on fire. I froze. The burning smell in the scarf that night, now there was an explanation. I appeared in a strange situation. What did you do then? I asked. I pulled her off the porch, Beck said. But when I touched her, I knew she wasn't breathing. The fire was about to spread, so I ran to find someone. Beck took a sip of wine and looked straight at me. When I turned around, I saw